Hi, friends. Coming at you here in U.S. history, too. We have been examining this essential question, right? What political solutions were proposed to overcome the economic issues of the Great Depression? And Ms. Kiefer and I have asked you to look at how you would answer some of those problems. We gave you 4 situations and asked you to identify some solutions. And then we categorized those solutions as being conservative or liberal or radical. And then we took you through this approach, right? Looking at Herbert Hoover and his conservative approach to cleaning up the problems of the Great Depression. And we talked you through some of those approaches by looking at tariffs and looking at the Dawes Act and examining the impact of trickle-down economic theory and the concept behind that of government assisting business and industry and hoping that business and industry will assist the people, the workers. And then we kind of wrapped up with an examination of the challenges that Hoover faced, including the bonus army. But as we ended our last class, we introduced you to Franklin Roosevelt and his approaches and identified that while Hoover took some conservative approaches, Franklin Roosevelt is going to be on the other end of the spectrum, taking a more liberal approach. And we shared with you a snippet from his inaugural address with the most famous sort of lifted phrase from it, which is the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. So in today's discussion, we're picking up on that essential question. We're asking that you take some notes on it. And we just want to continue with an understanding of how Roosevelt is going to approach these problems. Roosevelt is absolutely going to come up with some new solutions. And part of that is because the nation is desperate for it. And he bases those solutions around what are known as the 3 R's: relief, recovery, reform, right? Direct relief for people who are unemployed, recovery for business and the economy that's really struggling and had continued to struggle for 3.5 years. And then reform, right? Fixing, creating solutions to economic institutional problems, right? Thinking about things like the stock market and what fixes might need to occur in the stock market so it doesn't crash again, right? That's when we think about reform, creating some change to that institution. So let's talk a little bit about his approach. And I want to identify here that, Franklin Roosevelt sets a standard for presidents. Ever since Franklin Roosevelt's first term, we've used the concept called the 100 days. And we hear this every 4 years in presidential campaigns. What are you going to do in the first 100 days, right? And part of that is because Franklin Roosevelt, again, creates that standard. This idea that the president has to go to work immediately, right? Like jump right in there and figure out how to fix whatever wrong is perceived to exist. And Roosevelt takes action, believes that it is responsibility to jump right in there and solve problems. So let's talk about what happens in these first 100 days. So within the first 100 days of Franklin Roosevelt's presidency, he is really concerned with hitting those 3 R's, but these are some of the things that he does, right? He stops bank closures. So as we've looked at in the century, American banks were literally closing, and people who had their money in those banks, they lost all that money. Right, there was no insurance program that guaranteed that if a bank closed that you would get X amount of dollars from your bank account. He wants to prevent these banks from collapsing. So he just creates some systems, as we'll look at, what are meant to create stability with the American banking system. It's a good example of reform. He repeals prohibition. In a previous unit, we talked with you about prohibition. We understand that was created under the 18th Amendment. He repeals it and encourages Congress to pass the 21st Amendment. 21st Amendment removes prohibition, right? You can't go and erase the 18th Amendment to create a new amendment indicating that the 18th is no longer effective. The idea, if you're curious, behind doing that has to do with employment. He believed that if various industries like the alcohol industry, particularly the beer industry, could go up and running and back to work, that would employ people. It employs farmers because the grain is being used to create beverages, and then obviously people in the various factories. So he felt that this would be a help to the economy. He applies these ideas of what we call Keynesian economic theory, and I've simplified this for you, which is ultimately when the economy is good, we save money. And when the economy is struggling, we spend money. So I have a Jamboard here for you to look at, which kind of highlights this concept. So when the economy is doing well, what will the government do? Well, if the economy is doing well, the government is going to save money. Now, what does that actually mean? Like how? Well, they're going to save money in the sense that there's not, there's little spending on government projects. We are going to figure out how to reduce, reduce just general spending on a variety of issues. Maybe the government isn't going to be building dams or things like that, right? Because we're doing so well, we're going to figure out how to save. I think it's kind of like, if you have a job and you're making money, instead of like going, cool, I'll go spend it. Rather, I'm going to save it because I might need it later on and I have a surplus of it. That's the philosophy. And if the economy is doing poorly under this Keynesian economic theory, then what we want the government to do is to spend money. Right? They're going to put money into the economy. That could come in the form of direct payments. Today we call that stimulus money to the American people so that they can spend the money and help increase the economy. Right? So some of you are familiar with this, and this has been a discussion item that, if the economy appears to be struggling in COVID-19, then the idea is that the federal government figures out ways to give relief to people so that they get money in hand and they can go spend it. And if you go spend that money and you go to a restaurant, you're helping the restaurant. If you spend that money and you go help offset, buying a car, then that's great for the car industry. So you might think it's counterintuitive. Wait a minute, the economy is doing well. Why are we saving money? The economy is doing poorly. Why are we spending? Well, the philosophy is if the economy is doing poor, we need to create money in the system. We need to push people to spend because that's going to help inflate the economy. Now, here's the key. If the economy is doing poorly and we're going to be spending money, that means that you should have money in your bank to spend. Where do you get that? You get it from the time when the economy was doing really well, right? The money that you're spending here was the money that you saved when the economy was doing well. So here's what's tricky though, friends. What's tricky, going back to this slide, is that the US government didn't have any money in savings to spend when FDR becomes president, right? If we think back, Herbert Hoover and the presidents of the 1920s believed in decreasing the income tax, right? We're not bringing in as much money. The tariff has been high, but trade has stopped. So there's just not a lot of money in the American economy that the US government has control of. So they don't have a lot of funds to just start spending, right? But yet we know under Keynesian economic theory, as I just showed you, that when the economy is poor, we should spend. So where is the US government going to get this money from that they need to spend? This is the time period in American government where we do something we have never done before, and that's called deficit spending. Deficit spending is basically like going into debt. It is the US government spending money it does not have in hopes that it will be able to jumpstart the economy and make up the money that it is spending through debt. Think of it like a credit card, so to speak, right? The US government is literally charging against a credit card, spending money it actually doesn't have to spend in the hopes that it will get things started and it will eventually turn an economy around. The US entered into the deficit for the first time during Franklin Roosevelt's presidency. Now, I want to be clear that that deficit was paid off during World War II, meaning we were able to make up that money that we had spent. But ultimately, our country from time to time has gone back into deficit spending mode. And again, that all begins with President FDR, who is the first to do that. So these ideas of Keynesian economics are really kind of a new concept when it comes to how we think about saving and spending as a nation, and very important for us to realize that. The last point, sort of the bigger one here too, I want to address is that Franklin Roosevelt decides in the first 100 days to create a variety of government organizations. And there are a lot of programs and projects that are meant to support a variety of people here in the US, all trying to rebuild the economy. And he calls that the New Deal, right? The New Deal. And you might remember, like, I remember something with the deal. Oh, yeah, the Square Deal. That was TR. He kind of takes that concept of, I'm going to name my program and my plan from Theodore Roosevelt, and he applies that idea and calls it the New Deal. So the New Deal is a series of organizations. Here's one chart, but kind of blurry for you. Here's another one. And it has a lot of programs. These are just a few. Okay, I want to be clear. If you were to Google New Deal programs, you would see so many of them. Oftentimes, we associate them with an acronym like this one, FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And then you can see like what that program does. Well, the FDIC insures savings accounts in banks that are approved by the US government. Most of you, if you go to a bank, if you bank, keep your money at a bank, your banks are probably FDIC. If you go to a credit union like I do, then your accounts are not insured by the FDIC, but they're insured by another organization that's run through the federal government. Again, these are programs that are meant to alleviate some of the challenges that emerge that caused the Depression to occur. The Social Security Act, right, something that is still around today as well, was created as part of this New Deal plan. What is it doing? It's setting up a system of pensions or like a retirement plan for the elderly or the unemployed or people with disabilities, because the intent is that that's a population that needs additional support too. They need direct relief. So you can take a look here at these, these various programs and recognize that they are all trying to hit those 3 R's, right? Relief, recovery, reform. And the intent is to improve the economy. And there is a cost associated with it. Make no mistake. And we are spending that money through deficit spending. But FDR believes that these are potential solutions that will alleviate the tragic nature of the Great Depression. Next week, we are going to be digging on whether these programs are actually effective or not, whether they helped or were there other things that might have got the country out of the Great Depression. So sit tight on that idea. We wish you a delightful day. You might have snow. We'll see, right? And we'll talk to you later. Bye.